Hey Zwifters, hello and welcome to episode 4 of the Zwiftcast. I've got plenty to keep you entertained, informed and even challenged on this edition. Firstly, this fella says if you do his workout, you need to embrace failure.
People are coming back to me and saying, wow, I couldn't do your workout. It was impossible and it's too hard. The point isn't for the workout to be easy. The point is to actually be able to work up to completing the workout. People's default effort level tends to be very safe.
That's Mike McCarthy, a former world champion, and his thoughts on how to get the very best out of the workouts on Zwift, especially that one with his name on it, are direct, possibly surprising, but above all, fantastically useful. I've got an interview with the Queen of Zwift and one of the most encouraging and supportive voices for new riders in the whole Zwift community.
I mean, you got to get your feet wet. So you just got to hop on and do what you can do.
That's Julynn Washington. She's got 12 centuries to her name, and you can hear her tips for completing your first one later in the Zwiftcast. Now, what exactly is this Zwifter talking about?
It really does work on your efficiency on the bicycle because you're riding on a road that's under 2 feet wide. So picture that. If anybody's out on a training ride, try to sit on your center line of, the white line on the side of the road and stay on that line without really focusing on it. And that can give you a little bit of a hint of what it's like to be on rollers.
In praise of rollers, Jeremy Brazeal tells us why the traditional tool of the off-season for the serious cyclist can come bang up to date on Watopia. Let's start then with our regular roundup of some of the more interesting and even amusing things that are being said on the Facebook groups. And this episode, I'm joined by Christian Wiedemann, an elder statesman of Zwift who organises the ZTR races on a Tuesday and Thursday. His contributions to the groups are always measured and thoughtful. Hi Christian, let's start with the mobile app update, and I think the particularly interesting thing about this, which has generated some comments, is the ability to flag riders. There's been quite a lot of speculation on what this actually means, what effect, if any, it will actually have. What do you think?
Well, I think mainly what it provides is input from the community that Zwift can use to decide whether someone is, on the one hand, acting badly, and on the other hand, possibly cheating. I see those two functions as very separate because the cheating, is something that's less poisonous to the community than the flagging for saying something offensive. The offensive communication is something that can kill an online community very quickly. If people feel like it's a hostile environment, they won't come back. The cheating, I think, is an important topic, but it's not something that ultimately will prevent somebody from coming back.
It's the kind of offensive language thing and swearing and harassment, I think they've even got a button for. I mean, that is kind of an open and shut case. You've either done it or you haven't. Whereas the cheating thing, in inverted commas, there's so much of that can be inadvertent. So do you think they'll probably act quicker on offensive language flags?
I believe so, and I definitely hope so. It's something, as I said, that I think is very important to the community, that we keep an environment that's open and friendly. And frankly, over the whole beta and over the first few months of Zwift, overall, I think that the environment has been very friendly. People have been encouraging somebody who's riding a long ride, no matter what pace, gets lots of ride-ons. And I think that's something that will encourage people to join Zwift and encourage people to start bicycling as a matter of fact. So
Now, I know you work in IT. I'm not sure how much special privileged information you have on exactly what Zwift are doing, but let's speculate for a bit. Do you think that this first phase of flagging is actually simply a data gathering exercise for them before they decide how they're going to take any action?
My guess is yes. I know Zwift is a small company, and having worked in small software companies before, you always want to take a pragmatic approach and do little steps at a time. I think the data is, they'll see how many flags they get, and I think they'll use that data to decide how to implement an automatic mechanism to act on it. Some people have said that they've seen results from their flagging. I'm not sure if that's confirmed or not, but one can hope that at the very least they're using this as an alternative to the mechanism that they used to have where people entered support tickets to report the same kind of behavior.
Yeah. No, there was some speculation on the groups, actually, that when you flagged somebody, they immediately disappeared. I found that a little bit difficult to believe. I think it was possibly just coincidence.
I think so. I doubt that they're at that stage yet, because they first need to see how effective the flagging is. The problem with the flagging, of course, is it can go both ways. People in other games have used flagging as a way of harassing other game players. So I think they have to be careful, and I'm sure they're watching very carefully what's happening before they implement any kind of automated mechanism.
Yeah. I think in general people will welcome the advent of the tool, because there are a tiny minority of people who probably do need to be dealt with. Now, another thing that's come up on the groups, possibly causing a little less comment than I thought it might be, was Zwift's initiative to undertake a talent search in conjunction with Canyon SRAM to find a world-class female rider. It's a really exciting idea, and they're delivering on something that they've actually talked about for several months. Can it work?
I think more than a year, actually.
Yeah.
I remember the first article I read, I think in late 2014, already mentioned this idea of a talent search on Zwift. I think it can work, and I think that maybe there's some misconceptions about what they would do on Zwift. I very much doubt that they're looking for accurate power figures from Zwift. I think what they're looking for is sort of a ballpark to say that this person is really strong. And above all, what they want to do is reach out to a body of people who are excited about cycling. I think to be a female professional cyclist, you really have to be bitten by the bug, because it obviously doesn't pay very well at this point. So I think that what they're looking for is a way of getting the message out and a way of reaching people who they already know are interested in the sport.
That's an interesting idea. So it's almost like a big sign saying you can do this, and this could be the first step on the journey.
Absolutely. And I think if they need accurate measurement, what they'll probably do is they'll invite these people to a location where they have equipment which they are controlling, and they can actually do tests there. And that's probably going to be the last step, I imagine. And I truly hope that they do that in the public as well on Zwift, so that we get to sort of share in that experience.
Well, I've certainly asked them if the Zwiftcast could follow this process, because I'd be very interested in doing so, and letting listeners know some of the ins and outs of it. Let's move on to something a bit lighter. Now, a couple of people have contacted me, people I know in real life, and said, what the hell is this whole Ohio thing? And the whole Ohio running joke has now started to kind of break out of some of the smaller, more specialised groups and get into some of the bigger groups. So, as an elder statesman of Zwift, Christian, would you explain the Ohio joke, please?
What people have noticed is that with the way general chat is organized in Zwift, it's not very edited. So quite often people are excited when they come into Zwift and they want to see who else is there. It's a social platform after all. So they say, "Where are you from?" And the answer is just sort of bury any other conversation on the chat channel for a while. After
for minutes and minutes and minutes, actually, sometimes, yeah.
Somebody commented on this and said the canonical answer that they saw is, "I'm from Ohio." So it sort of became a thing to say anytime somebody asked where somebody's from, everybody who was in on the joke would answer Ohio. I think there was some a smaller movement that suggested that rather than Ohio, they should answer Hogwarts. I don't think that took off, though.
Now, speaking of the community, I mean, it's grown very quickly in recent weeks. We saw the big January influx, and that obviously has been represented on the Facebook groups. What would be your guess on just how many Zwifters there are in the world now? I mean, in a recent press release publicising the Canyon SRAM tie-up, Eric Min did actually state tens of thousands. How big do you think the Zwift community is?
Well, a somewhat educated guess is I suspect they have about 100,000 registered users. So there are 100,000 active, well, not active, there are 100,000 registered Zwift accounts. It actually turns out that rider IDs are logged in the log files. And if you look at those IDs, you can see them getting up close to 100,000.
Oh, really? So this is a kind of quite cool IT guy way of speculating
Yeah.
based on something that might actually be true.
My guess is they may no longer assign sequential IDs once they hear this, because it's not the kind of information that they generally would want out with that kind of precision. But I know, for instance, that my rider ID, if you right-click on your profile, you can see what your rider ID is. My rider ID is 994. So I can claim to be one of the first 1,000 Zwifters.
How interesting. Well, I will absolutely be clicking on my rider ID as soon as soon as I finish this conversation. And on that issue of numbers, there was a bit of flack, maybe not flack, but there was certainly a fair amount of discussion in certain corners of the Facebook groups about Steve Beckett's observation to me in a Zwiftcast interview that racing for Zwift was still niche. And of course, in numbers terms, he's absolutely right. The number of people who race on Zwift compared to the general population is a minority. But you've got some points you'd like to make about that in support of racing being treated with the seriousness it deserves.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think that it's definitely true that at any given time, a small percentage of the riders on Zwift will be racing. But I think that one of the unique things about Zwift is that it provides an absolutely safe environment to try out racing. You don't have to worry about crashing. You don't have to worry about pack handling skills. You can just try out the pure competition of trying to be faster than the next guy on the road. And I'm kind of hoping that is something that Zwift will encourage, because I think it's a great way to get people interested in cycling as a sport, a competitive sport, as opposed to just an activity that you do at casual pace. With Zwift, we have the ability to run races at very many different levels. We can run races with 8 different categories if we want, because in a virtual environment, it's very easy to create another race group, whereas a real race promoter could not do that because of the logistics of having to close the roads, of having to have course marshals, all of this to support the race. So what I'm hoping is that as time goes on, Zwift supports the racing community and provides a way for everybody to try racing, even if they only race once a month. That would still qualify as a niche, but one that touches many different people.
I think that's a really interesting point. And of course, we tend to equate racing, obviously, with people who ride fast. But actually, there's no reason that moderately paced riders can't race against other moderately paced riders.
You can race at any speed. In fact, that's the famous quote, right? It doesn't get any easier. You just go faster.
Yeah.
So really an A race and a C race, in terms of the effort that goes into trying to win the race, they feel very similar. And I also think it's a very interesting way to experience the sport. For those who are actually fans of the sport, you can actually race and see the dynamics of what the professionals are going through. You can understand drafting a lot better when you're sitting at the back of the pack trying to hang on to that last wheel than just watching and having somebody like Phil Liggett tell you about it. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, I sometimes think that I spend too much time talking about racing because, not all Zwiftcast listeners are racers, but I race and it's something that interests me. And I think that idea is brilliant and could easily pull lots more people into racing because, at whatever level, racing is incredibly exciting, great fun, and guarantees you a good workout.
Absolutely. It's the best workout that I've ever had. And frankly, it's the only interval workout that I've done for over a year at this point. And I think that, it's great training.
Christian, as ever, it's terrific speaking to you, and there's some really thoughtful, intelligent, exactly as I would have expected from you, points being made there, and lots of really interesting talking points. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk about it.
This next interview is quite long, but honestly, it's worth every second. How often can you get training advice from a world champion cyclist who's also a key figure in the Zwift senior management? Welcome to the Zwiftcast to Mike McCarthy. Now, Mike is what I like to call a Zwift insider. In other words, he's one of the guys at the top of the business who helps decide how Zwift is shaped and what happens to us riders on the platform. Hi, Mike. Perhaps you could give me a better job description than that one.
Sure thing, Simon. I am in the most enviable position of being the VP of Partnerships at Zwift. I joined just after the product was launched last fall, the fall of 2014. And my role at Zwift is a little bit outward facing and working with the industry and developing industry partnerships for us, and as well as working with our team to see how we deploy those in the game, and how we work with the industry in the game.
Okay.
So, really fun job.
Yeah, and you've been very modest, because what you haven't mentioned is that you are a former pro bike rider who enjoyed a huge measure of success, including a world track championship title. So I ought to say that, even if you won't.
Well, sure, and maybe in homage to Star Wars, and a long time ago in a galaxy far away, right? But yeah, it was a nice run, and certainly something I'm pretty proud of, and I don't spend a lot of time thinking about it, but every once in a while it's nice to realize that there was some good history there.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that will make what you're going to go on to say it deserves some respect. So what we're going to talk about really is getting the best out of workout mode, and you've got an interesting idea really that in some senses people who are doing workouts should not be afraid of failure. Now, what do you mean by that?
What I've come to notice is that people's default effort level tends to be very safe, and even if they think they're going hard, there are very few times where you actually fail in an effort. And I say this with all due respect to people. People quit before they fail 9 times out of 10. And so when I see emails, and I see a lot of emails from people, and especially since I have a workout with my name on it that's fairly difficult in the game, people are coming back to me and saying, "Wow, I couldn't do your workout. It was impossible, and it's too hard." And the point isn't for the workout to be easy. The point is to actually be able to work up to completing the workout. And so I've thought a lot about it, and I think that as someone who's definitely had to push their limits, the one piece of advice or guideline that I'd love people to work off of when they think about doing hard workouts is to embrace failure, that it's okay to fail. As long as you really believe you're failing and not quitting, it's the path forward. You'll never ever know where the limit is unless you get there and try to push through it. And oftentimes that entails not being able to finish what you started out to do. So it is, of all things, when you asked me what the piece should be about, and I think quite succinctly it's failure.
It's a very interesting idea, Mike, that, and there's a couple of issues arising from that I'd like to explore. Firstly, how many times should you tolerate failure on, let's take your workout for instance, before you start to think, I really need to be going down a different track here?
So I would start by doing the what's known as the McCarthy special, and I have to actually give credit to one of my first coaches, Eddie B, who gave us this workout. And it was in its very simplest form. We did it on a trainer, and we'd start it and going through the gears. So 15, 14, 13, or 14, 13, 12 on the cog set in the back. We didn't have power, and we didn't, do anything off heart rate. This was just an effort-based interval. So it was supposed to be hard, harder, hardest. And I'd start doing these in December, maybe once a week. And my goal was to be able to do three full 9-minute intervals. So 27 minutes of effort. And every December I'd start these, and I would fail somewhere in the during the first interval, and usually it was in the 6th or 7th or 8th minute of that interval. But within a few weeks, I'd start to work into them, and I could do the full 3 sets, and then I do them. I start working up a cog harder. So it really is. I think for most people, they consider FTP to be a great benchmark and a metric of where they, what their cycling ability looks like. But FTP is not your limit. FTP is it's a place where you can ride comfortably.
It's a time trial effort, really.
It is a time trial effort, but in order to and it's a very safe effort, though, right? You know that this is what you can do. But in order to really improve the whole cycling experience, being able to make harder efforts, and recovering from those is key. We see that on group rides all the time. If you get gapped off, you have to close the gap, and then you have to recover in the group. It's quite difficult. So the answer to the question, I've gone round and around here, really is there's no schedule. You should take the workout based on FTP, and if you fail on the first one, it's fine. Come back and see if you can go another minute the next time you try it, and keep working into it that way. Eventually, if you're being honest with yourself about your effort and not quitting, you should be able to do the workout as it's prescribed in the game.
Yeah, and there are parallels to real life riding there. I mean, when I get back outside, I'll go out with my local club chain gang. It's got the fastest guys in the club there. A lot of them are a good deal younger and a good deal fitter than me. And I'll measure my progress by how long I stay with the chain gang. I mean, I'm going to get dropped at some point, but I like to get dropped later and later as the season progresses.
Effort is effort, whether you're in Zwift or on the road. It's the same thing. You still have to go hard. And you can craft that and learn about how to make those efforts in Zwift or on the road. Zwift is a great training tool.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with that. Now, I'm going to be a bit challenging here because I absolutely hear what you say about embracing failure and slowly getting your way through that workout so that you do eventually succeed. But do you think that the gold star award when you successfully complete an interval kind of mitigates against that way of thinking a little bit? No one wants to not get the gold star.
It's a good question. We've talked about the star a little bit. Look, it's a reward, right? And if you should be excited when you get there and not go in with the expectation that you're going to get one. I think not to be harsh about it, but you shouldn't go in with a sense of entitlement. You should really want to earn it. So I get that people would be a little upset if they're going in and say I'm doing the workout and I know I'm going to fail, but I still want the gold star for effort. Not everyone gets a trophy. You have to earn it.
Well, I think that's an excellent answer, and I mean it kind of fits in with my thinking that a bit like you wearing the world champs jersey, you've got to earn these things.
Yeah, that's of course mine's a little dusty. So
no, but I think you're right about that. Now, we've seen some group rides that have been supervised by some great guys from the Peak Coaching Group, which is Hunter Allen's organisation. Just for people who are new to training with power, and I think there's quite a few of those on Zwift, just give us an idea of the kind of significance of the stature of Hunter Allen.
Well, Hunter wrote the book on training with power and has been, one of the preeminent sort of authors of the whole system of training with power. And of course, Zwift is based on power, so we put we're pretty proud to have Hunter as a partner in the game for sure. But yeah, it's for us, it's a nice feather in our cap that he wanted to come and work with us and design some training programs for us. And of course, now he's got close to 30 of his coaches riding on Zwift and riding with their athletes on Zwift. So
and how do you,
an exciting partnership for us.
How do you see those coached rides developing? Because the limitations of the group text system are, well, you've not got a lot of time and space to actively coach people, although, I know some efforts have been made in that direction.
Well, to be quite honest, in many cases, the coach doesn't even need to be on the bike with the rider. The coach can sit there and just message off a keyboard and watch people in fan view. And of course, if you're coaching throughout the day and people in different time zones, it's probably prudent to do it that way anyway. But for us, we've talked to a number of different coaches and coaching groups. But Hunter really got the idea of being able to engage riders directly. And how often do you actually get to sit there and watch somebody and give them real-time feedback? Everything is done as a post-ride breakout for the most part when you talk about coaching. And so an athlete, say, who has a prescription to ride 3 zone 5 or 5 zone 5 intervals during a workout, and gets halfway through the first one and can't get their heart rate above 120. It's really nice when you have a coach that sits there and says, "Hey, let's call it a day, and come back and try this a different time."
Yeah,
because you're tired, or encouraging someone who you see is maybe like close to failure. And I mean, there's a lot of input and a lot of feedback that you can get in real time that would be really difficult to give somebody in a real world environment.
I think that whole area of real-time coaching, I did a piece on a recent podcast about a guy who'd been coached all the way through a race on Zwift by his coach in real time, and he was just kind of ecstatic about the psychological and tactical benefits that he'd got from that. So I think this whole area, as Zwift develops, is only going to get more interesting.
Yeah, it's exciting. And then, of course, there's no secret that the event module's going to begin to come online at the end of the month. And once that's there, there's just so much more opportunity for really curated activities, and activities that are really specific to coaches and small groups of riders. So from my seat, it's a pretty exciting time. Yeah,
no, I agree with that. Now, I'd just like to finish this conversation, which I have to say I think has been incredibly useful, particularly for people who ride a lot in workout mode. But there's another nugget of wisdom I think that you can pass on, and I've heard this often before, is that people should not be afraid of riding very, very, very easy. And I think the problem with Zwift is it doesn't really encourage that, because, you get out there and you get drawn into little battles. But you've got something to say about that.
Well, Zwift is a game, right? And we all get on there to play. It's a playful environment. It's a social environment. And being disciplined is really difficult.
Yeah.
I have that problem. I love chasing jerseys just as much as anyone. But that's where the discipline component comes in. And if you can be disciplined enough to go super hard, and not be afraid to fail in your efforts, you should also be disciplined enough to go out there and completely turn down the efforts, and sort of laugh when you see people come by you going 8 watts a kilo, and say, all right, well, that's not me today. And active recovery is a really important component of what I do on the bike. So,
and what we're talking about here, Mike, we're talking really zone two rides, aren't we?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I do rides where the heart rate, I try to keep the heart rate under 120 the whole time. And it's actually quite pleasant when you get out there and do it. It makes the legs feel pretty good. So I guess what I always propose is that people really think about being dynamic with their training, which means raising the upper level and dropping the lower level, and maybe spending a little less time in that mid-range, which is where we all like to go most of the times we do group rides, for instance. It's the medium hard efforts, right? You're never really, really on the rivet or crushing yourself, but you're also going pretty hard. quite honestly, you don't get a lot from doing that. So it's I think be dynamic is the message. I always find it interesting when I'm out on a ride, and I pass somebody going 5K an hour faster, and they immediately jump on my wheel, and I think, why are you doing my ride now? You should do your ride. And I know it's exciting. That's what cycling is all about to a certain degree. But I think that we all have to be committed to our own programs, no matter what those are. And quite honestly, if your program is just all about going out and doing group rides and being social, that's great. But if you're looking to improve, commit to your program.
I think there's some real wisdom there, Mike, and I'm sure people who, and there's a great many people in Zwift who spend a lot of time in workout mode. I'm sure they'll find that incredibly useful advice. Thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely, Simon. And one last thing I'll add, because I always have something more to say. It's a funny piece of advice that I gave to my daughter as she went off to swim in college. And she called me and she said she couldn't believe how hard the workouts were. And I said, well, what are you worried about? She goes, I just feel like, I'm going to die out there if I go any harder. And so after reassuring her that she wasn't likely to die by going hard in her workouts, she actually called me back a couple of weeks later and she said, it's incredible. I've gotten so much better. And you're absolutely right. I'm still alive. So
hard work never killed anybody.
That's right. So attack it with full gusto.
That's another great pearl of wisdom. Thanks very much, Mike.
Yeah. All right, Simon. Thank you.
A century ride, whether that's metric or imperial, is a big benchmark for Zwifters. One rider has chalked up 19 of these achievements, and she's become something of a role model. My next guest on the Zwiftcast is Julynn Washington, and her appearance is really long overdue on the podcast because she's really the queen of Zwift. And for those who haven't heard of Julynn, well, they're obviously not spending enough time on the Facebook groups or on the island. Welcome, Julynn.
Hi, Simon. How are you? Thank you for having me.
I'm very grateful for you appearing. Now, first of all, for those who don't know you, let's just hear a little bit about your history, and particularly your history on Zwift.
Oh, my goodness. Well, actually, I am just a casual rider trying to be a cyclist. And luckily, doing an internet search, I found Zwift.
And you've done, incredibly well since then, haven't you? You've got a number of centuries, haven't you?
I have 12 imperial centuries and 7 metric centuries under my belt so far.
With 12 imperial centuries under your belt, what would be your tips for somebody thinking of doing a century?
Well, preparation is certainly, and taking it a little at a time. So, of course, it depends on your fitness level in the beginning, but not to rush it, just to build casually and add more miles as you go. Now, I probably should have taken my own advice because on my very first one, I guess it was the adrenaline that kicked in, but I went from doing 6 miles or 16 miles to doing my first metric century, I think within the 2 weeks I was on Zwift. But that was pure adrenaline,
Well, that's quite an achievement. Did you find it hard, that first one?
Well, no, not really. And that was another strange thing because actually I did the first one with no brakes. So it wasn't, not while I was doing it, but afterwards, I was dead. I was toast.
And since then, what have you learned about riding centuries?
Well, certainly that you need to be as comfortable as possible. So some good riding shorts would be wonderful. And I always use canvas cream. I know that was a big debate on Swift Riders page for a moment, whether you use it or not to use it. But I don't ride without it. So that's very important. And then hydration, which I'm suffering with at the moment, but good hydration and being able to fuel while you're on the bike.
Yeah, yeah. And do you have a little support crew who bring you drinks, or do you have them lined up in advance?
Well, I have both, actually. My daughter, she lives with me, and at any moment I can just yell up from the girl cave and ask for a refill on this or to bring me this. So that's very helpful. But I also try to have things in line, for more practice, for a practical ride if I'm riding solo.
Yeah. And what would you eat over a 100-mile ride?
Oh, wow. Well, actually, and I probably need some work on this, but I normally do gels. And then also, I always have to have a banana and a Cliff Bar of some sort. And that's normally it.
Yeah, well, that's pretty good. Now, I was so pleased to hear you talk about the girl cave. I mean, there are, in terms of how many people there are on Zwift, there are relatively few ladies. I mean, we are seeing more joining, I think. What do you think can be done to encourage more ladies onto Zwift?
I think it's just the fact that them feeling comfortable and feeling that, they're wanted, that their presence is pretty much required, that we want you here. I know as for me, I have no problem being a soloist and riding amongst the guys. I've always been a tomboy and always in the sport, so pretty comfortable there. But I do understand the feeling of women wanting to feel like they belong, and it's just not a male-dominated sport, even though it is. But we are still welcome to, do what we do. And, of course, maybe be better than some of our male counterparts.
Well, I mean, there are certainly some very, very strong women riders on Zwift. And it was great to see just a few days ago that the women finally got their own jerseys.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I know that was a big discussion, and I hate to say, but long overdue. But we're thankful now that we have them. And so the ladies are very, very excited and competitive. So it's a big talk in the ladies group about the jerseys, and they've been working real hard to get those screenshots. So that is wonderful. Yeah,
it is. And as you say, it was a long time coming. I can only assume that it was kind of more difficult technically than we might have imagined to do it, because there was no real reason not to do it, was there?
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. So I would certainly like to think that maybe it was very difficult for them to incorporate it in there for us, but I'm glad that they did get a chance to do it.
Now, you've been obviously a pretty inspirational figure for not only for women but also for new riders in general. What would be your kind of tips if you are a new rider on Zwift? What's the best way to get into the community and to get feeling comfortable riding around the island? Basically,
just to do it. I mean, you got to get your feet wet. So you just got to hop on and do what you can do. So if you can only ride 10 miles, then ride 10 miles. If you have time to do it every day, do it every day. Do it as often as you can. Give ride-ons to people. Just experiment, change courses, but just get involved. Join the Facebook riders group, and there are so many other Zwift Facebook pages that you can join. So just, get yourself exposure so we can meet you, we can know you, and then we can start to conversate, have conversations and schedule rides together. And that's how you get to know so many people.
Yeah, no, I think that's true, and there's real strength in numbers. Do you think the ladies only group or the women only groups on Facebook are helpful for trying to increase the numbers of females on Zwift?
Absolutely. And I say that is because we get to talk about things not only as athletes, but female athletes. And that is certainly different than a male athlete in so many different ways. So, we're more comfortable about speaking about some things we wouldn't put in an open public forum, for both male and female. So being able to do that, and you build confidence as well, and that gives you more time on the island. That means you get better, fitter, you get stronger, and you get to participate, or you feel more comfortable participating in some of the rides or the races that you ordinarily wouldn't have.
Sum up for us what you feel about what Zwift has been able to do for your cycling and your fitness in general.
Oh my goodness, it has just been wonderful, and I probably could talk about that all day. But basically, with my time and my schedule being so, restricted, not having much time to get on the bike as I would like, it has afforded me the opportunity when I have the energy to just ride at any time. And I remember a few months before I started Zwift, my plan was to condition and build for my first Imperial Century on the outside. And I had started a program, and I was like the 20-mile week, so it was the first week. And then when I found Zwift, I had only ridden about 20 miles. And so actually, February the 1st on Zwift was my first ride, and I had ridden my first century by March the 10th. I think it was my birthday, if I got the days right. And then I did 2 in that month. So, it really, it motivated me. It was just a different experience, and it made me want to ride the longer miles. It made me want to do it. It was just so exhilarating that I just couldn't stop for some reason. And some things got neglected when I should have been doing something else. I found myself on Zwift, so I had to soon curtail that. But I think it took about 6 months or so before I got myself together. Like, okay, you got to get off the bike.
And have you got your first outside century? Have you done that yet?
Believe it or not, no, I haven't. But I have one scheduled for April the 9th.
Oh wow! Well, I'm sure people will be watching out for that on the Facebook groups. Do you know, it's been fantastic to talk to you. I've seen you around so much on social media and on the island, and every time I see anything from you, it's nothing but positive and supportive. And I think the community really needs people like you. So thank you very much for everything you've done. I think you've given some fantastic tips on riding centuries and also for getting more ladies involved. Lovely to talk to you. So thank you very much, and ride on.
Thank you for having me, Simon. Ride on.
Julynn truly is inspirational, and before the end of the podcast, we'll meet another Zwifter whose achievements are equally awe-inspiring. This is what he was told after he revealed his plans to his oncologist after being given the news that he had around a year to live.
The doctor, who's known me for quite a long time, looked me straight in the eye, smiled and said, quite simply, what you're suggesting is impossible. And I smiled back at him, looked him in the eye and said, I like impossible, and walked out.
Did he achieve the impossible? You can find out later. Welcome to the Zwiftcast to Jeremy Brazeal, and we're going to do a short segment called In Praise of Rollers. Jeremy, rollers are kind of the polar opposite to highly expensive smart trainers, and I gather you ride on them a lot. Just give us a few words in praise of rollers, please.
Sure. I think my relationship with rollers is a long one. I started training and racing in the mid 80s, and back then you were on rollers. That was the accepted training device for anybody who is a serious cyclist. We would spend the off season or the winter months working on form, cadence, our proper pedal stroke, things like that. So I would spend endless amount of time on them, and of course riding no hands, taking your jersey off, taking your shoes off, all this different stuff to try to keep it interesting. But now we have Zwift, so you can use Zwift to keep it interesting.
They require a reasonably high level of skill, don't they?
Yes, they absolutely require a high level of skill, practice. It doesn't happen overnight. It really does work on your efficiency on the bicycle because you're riding on a road that's under 2 feet wide. So picture that. If anybody's out on a training ride, try to sit on your center line of, the white line on the side of the road and stay on that line without really focusing on it. And that can give you a little bit of a hint of what it's like to be on rollers.
What are the benefits of them on the Zwift platform?
For one thing, they're the benefits of being on rollers in general. Before Zwift, I could spend 45 minutes training inside. It was really hard for me. I would have to split up longer rides if I had to do base training throughout the day just because I couldn't do it. It was just too challenging to just sit there, blank, staring at the wall or trying to watch a movie. And then Zwift comes along and you can spend a lot more time on the rollers because of the software. But I was really worried that spending that amount of time on the rollers, if I was on a trainer, I would start getting into some bad habits around form. And, when you're on a stationary bike that's not rocking underneath you, that's not responding to your movements, you can get into some really bad habits in relation to your form. So I was concerned about that. So that's why I elected to really stay on rollers for the most part.
I think that's a very persuasive argument for rollers. Now, on the kind of downside, they must be really difficult to make work accurately in Zwift, are they? What's your setup? Do you have a power meter on the bike and you simply put the bike on the rollers and then get Zwift to talk to the power meter?
Exactly. I mean, and that's the other benefit of it, too. There's no setup. I can use my bike that I train outdoors on. I use an older bike indoors, but it does give that freedom to just hop on and ride, and there's really no prep.
Well, listen, I don't want to turn this into a technical help desk, but I mean,
sure.
Given that you are a bit of a roller specialist, I mean, if people don't have a power meter, would you recommend that they use rollers in Zwift, or is there a good way to make that work?
Well, I have tried smart trainers, I have tried dumb trainers, I have tried the rollers, obviously, in Zwift. But one thing I haven't tried is the Z-Power setup. So it's really hard for me to answer that question, but if that's what somebody has and that's their gateway into more effective training because of using Zwift, then absolutely. You should, because you're going to work on your form and you're going to work on all the details around being a good cyclist and not just whether you can put out some power.
Yeah. I mean, I think theoretically Zwift does support rollers, doesn't it? It does list a couple of models.
I think it probably does for Z-Power. It should, but if you have rollers that are not on that list, then absolutely no. You probably shouldn't do that because your Z-Power numbers would be through the roof, probably.
Yeah. And do you use rollers the whole time on Zwift?
Yeah, I do. Like I said, I used a kicker for about a week. But I switched back. So.
Well, that's interesting, isn't it? Because the kicker is a much desired piece of kit. What did you not like about it compared to the roller experience?
Yeah, so I want to be clear. My experience with the kicker has nothing to do with whether it's worth what they cost, because they're a great piece of training kit, as you put it. But for me, it comes more down to the stationary aspect of it that I have personally with any indoor training device. I do not feel like the bike is part of me when it's locked into a stationary setup. So that was really my only problem with the kicker. It wasn't fun for me. I liked the fact that it adjusts, it adjusts the resistance for the terrain, but in a sense, we're not going up real climbs. It is virtual, and I'm doing that on the rollers anyway, because I know a gradient. I know what power numbers I'm going to put out on that gradient at a certain RPMs, and I adjust the shifting to match that if I want to get kind of that balanced workout. Yeah. That's my opinion. So.
Yeah, no, I can understand that. And, it's refreshing kind of to hear somebody who's not bought into what sometimes seems like a bit of an orthodoxy, really, that you have to have a very expensive, high-end, all-singing, all-dancing smart trainer. You race, don't you?
I do, yes.
Yeah. How do you get on in races in Zwift? I mean, presumably you get up to some pretty furious cadences, do you? I
do, and that's actually a really interesting topic, because I've gone through a process of figuring out how to race effectively in Zwift. And when I was originally during beta, I started racing on, say, like a rainy Tuesday night if our local training race was canceled or something like that during the racing season. And I was on a set of older Kreitlers that didn't have any kind of resistance setting. And I would find that, I would have trouble anytime we hit it hard on, say, like a KOM climb, or, keeping up with people that, I knew that I could keep up with. And it really had to do with the fact that when you're sitting at a minute to 2 minutes at a high power effort, but your cadence is 140, 150 RPMs, you're dealing with a cardio deficiency trying to hold that.
Yeah.
So I ended up going out and finding some used rollers for $80 that had a resistance unit on it, so I could actually adjust that resistance so I could get the most out of my power meter at a lower cadence. I'm a little bit limited on the top end in a sprint, but I think that would be the case with anything that you're using in Zwift.
Now, I'm bound to ask you this because, it may be way back when, and it may never have happened to you, but for many cyclists, they have had an embarrassing moment or two on or more likely off the rollers. Actually, what's your worst moment on the rollers?
When you're on the rollers, obviously you're paying attention to whether you're staying on them. But then racing in Zwift, you're looking at your power numbers. You're looking at the feet of riders around you to see where they're at behind you, in front of you, what numbers they're putting out, and then also paying attention to the terrain. When I first got in the game, everybody I'm sure dealt with when suddenly the game changes and goes through a corner, your mind wants to then turn. But when you're on on a trainer, that doesn't matter. It's just kind of more psychological. But on the rollers, you're somebody who rides bikes a lot. Your muscle memory, it just wants to turn the bike. And so that was a challenge. That took me. For like the first couple months I was in beta, probably, or a month, I would have to look down when a corner was approaching. Maybe it wasn't that long. And then once I started racing, I didn't complete the first 2 ZTRs that I joined because I did, when in those moments of real intensity, when you're really going for it and you're paying attention to the other riders around you in the game, I rolled off them.
You did come off them. You are going to admit that you did come off the rollers. I
will. And a really funny moment happened probably a couple months ago, right when we started getting that kind of ET bug where you would just fly off the course and float around. I was in a front group in the ZTR. There's probably about 3 or 4 of us, and we were on the last lap, reverse Watopia, and we were going through the cobbled section in the little town there, and we're putting out some good watts. I think probably somewhere upwards of 5 watts per kilogram. So we're working really hard, really taxed. And all of a sudden, as we're approaching the covered walkway, the arch, the game sent me off the course, but it was so abrupt and that hadn't happened to me before. I almost picked up speed and hit the wall of the building. And yes, I rode completely off the rollers at the same time. And it felt like a real crash in a bike race.
I bet it did. Well, hopefully there was no one there to witness this.
Yeah, luckily. Maybe you should make sure somebody else is in your house when you ride rollers in Zwift. I don't know, in case something bad happens. I was alone in the house.
It's been great talking to you in praise of rollers, and keep your eyes on the road and stay on the rollers.
Yeah, well, thanks, Simon, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to join you on this.
Derek Boocock has a remarkable life story, characterised by facing up to and defeating big challenges. As a teenager, Derek lost a lot of bone in his leg to cancer. Despite that, he took up cycling and later became an army fitness instructor, taking on a series of big physical challenges, including lots of long-distance cycling. 10 years ago, he was diagnosed with cancer again, both in the lung and in the prostate. Eventually, he lost a lung, and around the same time, he lost his wife to breast cancer. But nothing seems to defeat Derek, and his latest exploits include some fairly serious endurance rides on Zwift. Welcome, Derek, to the podcast.
Yeah, it's good to be here, Simon.
Okay, now listen, one of my very favourite stories about you is the postcard you sent to your oncologist from a place called the Roof of the World. Tell us a little bit about that.
When I was told that the cancer had returned to my lungs, I asked the doctor, how long do I have? And he said, well, maybe 12, 18 months at best. And so I said to him, well, I'm going to go cycle touring. And he said, yeah, that would be really beneficial, Derek. Where are you going to go? And I said, well, I'm going to cycle to the roof of the world, the Premier Highway, which is the second highest highway in the world. And the doctor, who's known me for quite a long time, looked me straight in the eye, smiled and said, quite simply, what you're suggesting is impossible. And I smiled back at him, looked him in the eye and said, I like impossible, and walked out. And when I got to the top of the Premier Highway, the actual roof of the world, I took a picture of the road up there and I just sent it to my oncologist. And I just wrote one line on it, nothing is impossible. Doctors have told me on more than one occasion, that I wouldn't make it, and I proved them wrong.
Tell me about the time that you spent 5 hours riding the whole time out of the saddle. How did that come about?
When I was diagnosed in 2005, I chose to have a technique called brachytherapy. It was a relatively new procedure. What it involves is having 100 titanium rice-sized seeds sewn directly into the prostate, which you can imagine 100 needles stuck in your prostate is pretty painful.
I'm not liking the sound of that very much.
Well, it was pretty painful afterwards, and a couple of weeks afterwards, I was scheduled to go on a training ride with a charity group because we were going to do Land's End John O'Groats, 1,000 miles, so 200 miles a day. I became the unofficial trainer for the group. Kieran, the ride leader, phoned me up and said, well, I've heard about your surgery, Derek. I don't suppose you'll be attending. And I said, no, not a bit of it. I said, it's a through and off session, our first. You're going to need me there. And I said, I'll just ride along out of the saddle for as long as I can. Competitiveness sort of kicked in. And 5 hours later, I'd finished the whole ride, riding every single inch of it out of the saddle.
God, what was that like, Derek? That must have been incredibly difficult.
Extremely painful on the legs. But we were averaging, Simon, 20 miles an hour because that was the target, to finish in 5 hours, the 100-mile ride. You get caught up in it, and for me, it was just another challenge. It's just one more challenge.
You're not short of those, and you often seem to defeat these challenges. It's absolutely amazing. And, I mean, in your personal life, obviously your life's been terribly touched by cancer. You lost your wife to breast cancer, and that heralded a pretty difficult period for you.
Yeah, that was the hardest challenge I've ever faced, Simon. I mean, Caroline went in just 9 weeks after being told she had 12 months to live. God. And that just tipped me over the edge. I'm a very strong individual, but I couldn't cope. And for 3 years, Simon, I was in severe depression until I was told in 2012 I had cancer again. And to be honest, that's one of the best things that ever happened to me, because it kicked me into wanting to make something of whatever days I had left.
And cycling has, as it so often is in cases like this, cycling's proved something of a saviour for you. And through cycling, you met the new love of your life.
I was on a downward spiral on my around the world cycle tour. Basically, I honestly thought I was dying. I dropped to 53 kilograms in weight, and I just had a very serious accident. I dislocated my shoulder in a place called Rimouski in Canada while going downhill, and I was in pretty bad shape. I arrived in a hostel, and I met Hilke, this German girl that lives in the Netherlands, and I fell in love. And Hilke gave me the will and the reason to live again. I started fighting again, and it's a very incredible story because I didn't expect to make it through.
Well, I'm sure a great many people will agree with me, Derek, that you deserve that. You deserve that second chance after such a full life, full of so many challenges. And now you've found Zwift, and I'm really interested that somebody with such a massive cycling pedigree is finding Zwift such a useful tool. How do you use Zwift?
I'm using it now to try and return to the kind of fitness that I saw prior to my cancer. It will never happen, Simon. I mean, the results I've just posted in the 12-hour I did have shocked me, to be honest, because I never expected that level. And I think there's a certain amount. I'm using Z Power, and I like to think I'm as close to real life as possible. But what people have to understand is when I go outside and cycle here in the Netherlands, I've got wind and other features, and there's no way I'm going to push myself to the level I can on Zwift. On Zwift indoors, where I know I'm safe, where I know if I get into breathing difficulties, my wife's going to help me, I can push myself. And you only have to look at my heart rate data, which I'm happy to provide for people, and my watts output to see that I'm pushing far, far harder indoors on Zwift than I ever would outdoors.
I mean, and let's just remind listeners to the Zwiftcast, you've only got one lung.
Yes, which is why I say that I don't think I can return to my previous levels, but I think I can do pretty well because you learn to do things differently.
What impact does it have cycling with? I mean, I have to say sometimes when I'm pushing hard, I feel like I've only got one lung, but I do actually have two. But I mean, what impact does cycling with one lung have on you?
Well, I'll give you a real world example. I went out for a ride with the club. We were pushing along in the wind, and the wind was coming over my shoulder into my face. Now, the pace had got up to 36 kilometres an hour, and then it raised. Then Herwig, who was on the front, raised it to 38 kilometres an hour, and we were whizzing along. But I wasn't drafting because the wind was coming straight into my face and taking my breath away. And for the first time on the ride, I had to shout to Herwig, knock it back 2 kilometres, Herwig, because I can't breathe. And literally my heart rate was through the roof and I couldn't physically breathe. And that's the difference I notice. When I'm in a situation where I can't get enough air into my one lung, then I have to back off. I have to take it easy for a while.
Yeah. And I guess the benefit of Zwift is it makes managing those kind of difficulties a good deal more practical for somebody like you.
Exactly. That's my whole point. I can breathe when I'm indoors. There's no wind to take away, the oxygen. I can breathe better, so I can work harder.
You did a 12-hour event, a 12-hour TT on Zwift relatively recently. What distance did you cover over that 12 hours?
I think I did 255 miles.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's fantastic.
Which is very close to my real life. I think I managed something like 261 or something. So pretty close to my real life best.
Now this is in support of another inspirational Zwifter, Ray Brown, who obviously has the connection in that his wife has battled breast cancer. But you're a great supporter of his.
Ray, really, I have to say, was one of my inspirations. Riding across America, racing across America has always been an aim of mine. And hopefully, if I can help support Ray in some way, then I'm hoping Ray can help support me.
I think you two would make a great team. Just getting back to Zwift, I'm really interested in the perspective of somebody who's been a lifelong, what I would call traditional cyclist, a club cyclist, probably somebody who's done stuff in the old and very good ways, but Zwift is a new thing, and some of the more kind of traditional elements of cycling are a bit sniffy about it. What's your perspective on it?
Indoor training, Simon, is where it's at, particularly in the winter. I mean, here it's absolutely impossible at the moment in the Netherlands because we have solid ice on the roads. Indoor cycling for me is where it's at for that reason, but also it's just so much more controllable. So indoor cycling has been a big part of my training, but now it's become the most important part. I would say more important than riding outdoors because I'm going to be able to get the fitness I need, then take it outdoors.
It's been absolutely incredible talking to you. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. These are some of my favourite interviews to listen to people with a lifetime of experience, and particularly people who've defeated challenges and are now embracing the kind of new technology and the innovation that something like Zwift provides. And I think it's particularly helpful for people who are getting rehabilitated from injury, but also training for a specific goal. It's been absolutely brilliant talking to you.
Thanks a lot, Simon. Bye.
And it's goodbye from me for now. That's it for episode 4. I'll be back next time when I hope we'll be examining the release of the event module. It's due any day now. It's possibly going to be transformative, and I can't wait to try it out and see what other Zwifters make of it. Also next time, I'll be meeting the Zwift racer who's chicked the boys. Now, if you don't know what that means, look it up. Hope you enjoyed this one. If you did, tell your friends. And if you're on the trainer, remember what Mike McCarthy said.
Not everyone gets a trophy. You have to earn it.
So push on, Zwifters. See you next time.